The culture of Portugal it's so beautiful. It's a lot different than our American culture. They're very straightforward, which for me took a while to get used to, because as Americans we kind of beat around the bush a lot of times. But I actually grew to love their straightforwardness, and they just say it with so much love that you can't help but love them when they say it, and you're not offended when they say something. But the culture is very, very loving, very open. They'll tell you all about their lives. It's very different from the American culture in that they will just talk for hours. And sometimes it would be super hard in lessons to get right back into the lesson, because they just love to talk about their lives, their kids' kids, anything. They just love to talk. So it's really cool because you get to know them very well, because they're very open about their lives. They're very Catholic. The majority of the country is Catholic. So the majority of them go to Mass probably once or twice a year. And a lot of them, they would go every week. They were part of the community, the Catholic community. But the majority of the people in Portugal are not practicing Catholics, but they have a belief in Christ, and they love to hear about Christ. The food, you eat a lot of fish, but the best part for me about Portugal was the bread. That's why I gained a lot of weight, is because the bread is so good. That's the first thing that I heard when I got called to Portugal. My dad had been there before, and the first thing that he said to me was, the bread is so good. And once I got to Portugal, I realized just how true that was. The bread is delicious, and it's so cheap as well. They have freshly baked bread for super cheap. Probably, I would say most of the time we got our loaves of bread, like a pretty good size, for maybe 50 cents or less most of the times, every single week. And it's delicious. So they are known for their bread and for their pastries as well. They have pastry shops everywhere, cafes on every single corner with different pastries. And they use a lot of egg. So that's, I would say, one of their main ingredients for mostly their desserts, but a lot of times also their main courses is eggs. So they have a lot of egg-filled pastries. And they have this one, their famous pastry is called pastel de nata, which is basically just this tart with this like nata inside, which is basically this like milk-like substance, but a little bit thicker. Basically kind of seems like sweetened condensed milk, but a little bit more on the yogurt side. And then you put canela, what is that called? Cinnamon on top of it. And it's delicious. They drink a lot of juice as well, and it's delicious, the food that they eat. They use a lot of herbs to cook as well, and they eat a lot of potatoes, and they do eat a lot of chicken. They cook it a little bit differently than we do, but they eat chicken, and they eat a lot of beef. They have a lot of pasta as well, and they have delicious gelato ice cream, and it's a lot of people will come from Italy. For example, in Leiria, my second area, there was this Italian man that immigrated from Italy just to start his ice cream, his gelato business in Leiria. And it is the best gelato that I've ever had in my life. It's so delicious. So they have shops like that all around Portugal, of just shops full of gelato, and it's so good. It's very rare to find someone that doesn't drink coffee. It's a social thing that they do. Almost every single person on the street that you see is smoking. It's crazy. I've never seen anything like it before. But they do smoke a lot. So the language, it's Portuguese, obviously. But it's a lot different, actually, than the Brazilian Portuguese. So my sister, she served in Brazil. And coming back from my mission and speaking to her, it's so crazy to hear the difference between our accents. The language is still the exact same, and we still understand each other perfectly, but the accent is completely different, and some of the words that they use are different from the words that we use in Portugal. But the majority is the exact same. But for example, the Brazilians, to me, it's the difference between American English and British English. And so the American English would be comparable to the Brazilian Portuguese, and the British English would be considered considerable to the Portugal, the European Portuguese. And the European Portuguese is a lot more formal. Instead of an S sound, you say it like a sh instead of a Z, which is what they would say an S. The ending S is a Z in Brazilian Portuguese. Portuguese is a beautiful language. I love Portuguese. It's hard, but it's worth it. It's very similar to Spanish as well. A lot of times we'd be on the streets doing street contacting, and we would run into Spanish people from Spain or Mexico, but normally they were from Spain. And it's crazy. Once you can speak Portuguese, the Spaniard could be speaking Spanish to you, and you could be speaking Portuguese back, and you could both understand each other almost perfectly. Sometimes they would have to speak slow, or I would have to speak slow so that they could understand. But if you speak slow enough, you can basically understand the majority of what they're saying and have a conversation with them. Porto is a beautiful city. It's one of my favorite cities, and it has the bridge with the river, a really big river, and then just these like beautiful Portuguese houses. There are so many people out on the street all the time. It's just so busy. There's never a time when no one's on the street. There's always at least like 100 people on the street at a time, or way more. People eat a lot of fish, and so it's fish and potatoes all the time. That's like the only meal that we ever ate with people in Porto, because it's right next to the sea and the river. So they have a lot of seafood there. The weather, it was actually beautiful. Depends on the time that you're there. It rains a lot. So I did not know that, but it would be really good to know that it rains a lot, to bring rain boots, to bring rain jackets, and lots of umbrellas, because it's super windy. So your umbrella breaks at least like one time a week. So you have to buy new umbrellas. But that is more in the fall weather that it rains a lot. During the summer, it doesn't rain too much, and the weather is beautiful. It's humid, but it's not super, super hot. So it's really nice to be outside. The weather was normally about, I would say, 75, 80 degrees during the summer. And then I served on the other side of the river, which is basically Porto as well, during the winter, and it was freezing. So it got to probably, which doesn't seem too cold for Utah, but it's like 50, 60 degrees, but super humid and raining all the time. In the areas that I served in, we never used the metro, but in a lot of the other areas, use the metro or buses. Which I never got lucky enough to use the metro, so I just walked all the time. But I know that the other people use the metro and buses to get around in Porto. There's a lot of museums. There's a place, my favorite place is called Torre dos Clérigos, which is this huge tall tower that you can see a beautiful view for all of Porto. Because Porto is right next to the ocean. So Portugal is obviously right next to Spain. So the whole coast of Portugal is just the Atlantic Ocean. And so it's really cool because you can see the river, and then you can see just the rest of the Atlantic Ocean from this beautiful viewpoint. They have a lot of good places to eat. They have a lot of American culture actually in Porto because of the tourism. So there's a lot of McDonald's, there's a lot of KFC, a lot of Burger King, but then you have your typical Portuguese restaurants as well. Porto actually is named after their wine. So it's called O Porto. That's the first thing that I heard about when I got there. My dad is super into history. So there's a wine called O Porto that's like super famous and super expensive. And they have like on the Gaia side of the river, the other side of Porto, there's just tons of wine vineyards and wine factories where they produce and make the wine. So that was kind of cool. One day we did a tour of that. A lot of people, for jobs, they actually work as, at least the people that we talked to on the street, it was a lot of cleaning houses, working in factories, a lot of babysitting. These are the people that we talked to on the street, so we didn't talk to a lot of the wealthier people because they were always at work. But that is what I noticed to be a common theme, was they either were working at houses, babysitting or cleaning, or working at hotels or businesses cleaning. So that is what I noticed to be a common job in Portugal, in Porto actually. There are a lot of Brazilians in Porto, and all of Portugal. There are a lot of Africans, so we taught families from Cabo Verde, from Mozambique, from Angola, and then a lot of Brazilians. And then there were obviously a lot of Portuguese people as well. Madeira was amazing. It's an island off of the coast of Africa, so to get there you have to take a plane, and there's no way to get there without a plane. So you go on a plane for about 2 hours, and then you're in Madeira on an island, and it's super cool. It has its own culture. It's kind of crazy because I went there at the end of my mission, and I thought that I spoke Portuguese. I thought that I knew what I was doing, and then I got there and I was so confused because they have the craziest accent. So it's kind of like, in my opinion, it's an Australian accent. If we were speaking English, it's like an Australian accent for English speakers. So it took about 3 days for me to actually understand what people were saying. But Madeira has its own culture. It has its own dance actually, and it's super cool. They have like super cute costumes. They dress up in these skirts. They're like black, green, yellow, and red, which are the Portuguese colors. And they have these skirts, and they have these shirts and these little hats and these little boots that they wear, and they get together in this group of probably about 16 people, and they just go around in a circle, and some people are playing some instruments while they're just kind of dancing. And it's super cute. We saw that all the time just in the streets. But Madeira is beautiful. It's a really small island. You can get to the whole island from east to west, north to south in an hour. So it's very small, but it's so beautiful. It's probably one of the most beautiful places I've ever been in my whole entire life. And the water is just bright blue, so beautiful. There are just so many mountains. And so on the edge of the island, it's very flat until you get to the mountains, and it's just so hilly that we couldn't even walk. We had to have bus passes, otherwise it would take probably 3 hours to just get up to one area. So we used buses a lot in Madeira, and that was our main use of transportation. Obviously we walked to some areas, but the majority of the areas we needed a bus to get to. Otherwise it was impossible to get there in less than 2 or 3 hours. So the people are super, super nice. I love Madeiran people. Gaia, I love Gaia. It's so beautiful there as well. It's very old. The architecture is so old, but it has so much character. It's so beautiful. And you have cobblestone streets. Also in Leiria, I forgot to say that, but you have cobblestone streets almost everywhere you go in Portugal. You don't find real streets. You just have cobblestone, especially the sidewalks. They're all cobblestone. It's so beautiful. You feel like you're in a movie a lot of times. Gaia, the culture was a lot like the Porto culture because it's just on the other side of the river. We walked the majority of the time, but if we ever had to go somewhere like into Porto, which was only about 10 minutes by metro, we would use the metro. Yeah, the food was very similar as well in Gaia. A lot of fish, bacalhau, and my favorite dish is frango brás, which is basically just shredded chicken with these shoestring potatoes basically, and they put eggs in it, and then they season it with some onions and garlic, and it's basically all just mashed together, but it's so good. So we had that a lot of juice actually, and a lot of tea, herbal tea. So that was a common snack, was tea and crackers always. Leiria is one of my favorite areas. I can't pick a favorite area, but it's one of my favorites. Leiria is this small town in the central part of Portugal. So I spent 6 months there. I wanted to stay even longer because I loved it so much. But it's a super quaint little town in the middle of Portugal. And it has a lot of different cultures there as well. It's crazy because every single part of Portugal, they're all Portuguese, but they each have their own little culture. And so in Leiria, the people were way more open to me, at least. So many super nice people. Something that is just a European thing in general is to give 2 kisses on the cheek for women to greet each other. And so that is, and one thing that was super cool to help you connect really fast with a stranger. So sometimes even just on the street, people would offer to give you a greeting and kiss you on the cheek. So they're just super loving people, super open, super accepting. Leiria has a special place in my heart. I love Leiria so much. Faz muito tempo e eu já sinto muitas saudades. Eu não tenho palavras suficientes a dizer quão grata eu sou pela oportunidade e privilégio de servir a missão. Na missão Portugal Porto. Todas as pessoas que eu conheci me ajudaram muito. Só queria dizer que eu tenho muita gratidão por cada um de vocês. E que eu sinto muitas saudades de vocês. Espero logo, logo estiver lá com vocês. Espero que isso esteja suficiente. E eu vou ficar tão grata para sempre. Eu amo vocês, membros, pesquisadores, colegas, família, tudo. Todos que conseguem entender isso, eu amo vocês.